What do you get when a legless lad and a blind bloke walk into a bar? A couple of mates on a mission to challenge what it means to be tough.
Welcome back to another episode of Talkin Tough, a podcast on a mission to redefine what it truly means to be tough. As always, we are proudly brought to you by Ski for Life, an incredible Aussie charity dedicated to promoting mental health, wellbeing and suicide prevention. Back for another episode. Mike, how are you, mate?
I'm good. Fantastic. It's been a fun season this season, a really broad spectrum of guests, and it's great to have our guest with us today who's going to shed some light into a different vein. We haven't had anyone in professional sport, so it's going to be fantastic to get tucked into this guest today. How are you feeling, Benny?
Mate, absolutely. Our last guest of season 2. Very, very exciting. Very exciting for me, I must admit, because the man sitting in front of me, not that I can see him, holds a special place in my heart on a day in 2016. But Tommy Boyd, mate, welcome to Talkin Tough.
Thank you. Does the last episode of the season qualify as the grand final of the season, or is it just...
It might well do. Yeah. Well, we're definitely fanboying today from Ben's perspective because it was a great day. And I think everyone, would it be fair to say as a Hawthorn supporter, I think 99% of Melbourne were barracking for the Dogs on that day, obviously outside of the South Melbourne supporters, but I think that they're the team that you kind of like. Are they everyone's second team, the Bulldogs?
Yeah, less now, I think, but certainly then. I think that history of almost theirs and not quite good enoughs, and amongst all of the issues from a financial point of view, and talks of mergers and so on, it's been it's easy to attach yourself to one, a lovable creature and a dog, and also the fact that we were basically underdogs for a long period of time. I think
legitimate underdogs.
It's a bit hard to like a team who's won 15 or 16 flags as your second team, isn't it? So definitely. I mean, look, I think across the board, there was certainly the element of the Sydney supporters being behind Sydney, but I think everyone else basically was pretty rapt that we won that year for sure.
The people's champion.
Jumped on the bandwagon.
That's it.
100%. Mate, we'll dive into all that a little bit later on and that whole process, but we always like kicking off with growing up. What did tough mean to you? What did tough look like? Who was tough in your life?
Yeah, this is actually a really easy one. It almost sounds like I prepared for this thing, which I guarantee is not the case. It's not really in my vein. No, my dad was always the tough guy in my life. So Dad's background is he grew up in Fawkner, which is a nice way of saying Broadmeadows, basically. Yeah. And he's always been a leader of men. Like, he was always the tough guy on the field. He was a captain through most of his juniors. He was a captain as a senior footballer. He's been a leader in business for most of his life. And he was always known as the tough but fair. And I think one of the defining factors about Dad was always that he was incredibly brutal at times, and I'm sure overstepped the line of being tough versus being, a bully at different stages. I'm absolutely certain that happened. But I think on the flip side, he was always massive on fostering other people's growth. So he always helped develop people. He was always a coach in footy. He always was a big part of the, say, recruitment of young guys into apprenticeships. He probably had 200 people go through apprenticeships with him over the years. Wow. Like, just always had that element as well. And loved coaching and teaching people how to get better. So, but when it came to sort of articulating toughness in any sort of material way, he was always challenged from that point of view, I think. And I literally, I often say in many of the speeches that I do, that there was a period of time in my childhood where I learnt about toughness in a visual way, which was essentially that toughness was looking at a brick wall and trying to run through it with your head and seeing if the brick wall would fall over. And, if it didn't the first time, basically what you did was you dusted yourself back off, you went back to your mark, got in the runner's stance and tried again. And I think in part that was because Dad's messaging was so blunt in the, tough people win, tough people make it in the end. Everyone that I've known who's done well in business and life has been tough. Your mum's tough. Everyone was tough. And I think he's right. I really do think that there is a need to reinforce to people that being able to actually exhibit resilience and toughness is a really critical factor in a life in 2025, which is throwing all sorts of different curveballs at people, which we can talk about in any way, shape or form. But I think what he really struggled to teach me, and what I never learned until much later on in my life, was that tough people are essentially problem solvers, right? And they don't sort of limit themselves by the problems or the way to solve them. And if you look at Dad's life, there's certainly been times when he'd bunkered down and just done the, grit his teeth and white knuckle it through a crisis. But there's also been a lot of times where he's sought wisdom from other people. He's trusted other people to help him through issues and so on. And so I think, to your point and the question that you open with, I think there is a need to go and expand the fact that there is a association between tough being the way that things used to be done, which I think is negative, but there's also an opportunity to redefine it in a way that makes it a practical tool for people to actually have a mindset of actually resolving the issues in front of them, rather than I think what I see happen often these days is to ignore them or avoid them, which is not healthy.
Yeah, because often people, when they hear the podcast or they see what we're talking about and on a mission to redefine what it means to be tough, sometimes the assumption is that we're on this sort of mission to say no one should be tough anymore. There's no place for toughness. But as you said, I don't think that's the case at all. It's that old school macho definition of toughness, which was very physical, very, like you said, on the verge of potentially bullying, things like that. Back then, I think that was seen as a way of demanding respect as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Whereas I think, like you said, that's changed a fair bit now.
Yeah, well, I think all they were doing was avoiding problems in a different way, right? Like if you think back to the stereotypical man sitting at the bar drinking whiskey, trying to get through his issues and going, I don't care about anything, and just taking anger and bitterness through every stage of his life. That's just another form of avoiding the issues that you need to deal with, right? But I also think that not having any ambition or desire for, competitiveness or improvement or self-improvement in particular, I think is also a mistake, right? And I think I get this question about sport all the time. Tom, would you be happy if your daughter or your future kids end up being professional athletes? I'd be like, absolutely, I would. But what about all the issues that you went through? I'm like, yeah, but it also presented me with the greatest things that basically happened in my entire life. It provided for my family. It's, I bought a house through playing footy. I got to be a part of, millions of people's enjoyment throughout my time in footy. I learnt so much. I met incredible people and I built relationships that'll last a lifetime. Go find another place that you can do that in that same way. And so I think that there is to your point, there's a tendency of people going, if it's hard, it's bad, or if it's difficult, it's bad, or if it makes you feel less than good, it's a bad thing. And there's so much of life is the opposite of that. Being able to delay the gratification to actually work towards a goal, to build something, big, small, or otherwise, and actually get the fruits of your labour at the end of it is a magnificent thing that we should all strive to do, I think.
Yeah, 100%. It's the hardest things that are often the best things.
Absolutely.
The things that we say to ourselves in our talks, don't we? We go, it's through the hardest things in life.
Yeah.
That's where you grow the most and learn the most, both about yourself and what you're capable of. And I think that's that's
shit going through it.
Oh, 100%.
Terrible.
Yeah. Not great at the time, not fun. No one's enjoying it.
No. Yeah. And I think that's why so much of the misnomer around toughness is the fact that you should actually prepare for those tough times, right? That didn't used to happen. You sort of let them creep up on you and then punch you in the face, and you just hung on and did whatever you could to get through them, barring all of the consequences that come from that method of resolving an issue. Versus, as we progress through life, we should understand the things that do cause us stress and strain. We should also understand what things we actually are willing to sacrifice for and what we're not. But we should also be willing to learn throughout that process that there are so many things that we need to get us through critical moments in our life, whether that be great relationships with our partners or our family or our friends, whether that be, trusted advisors, whether they be more on the support side. You won't find someone who's more of a proponent of psychologists than me, but at the same time, I don't think they're the tool for every issue.
Sure.
And it's also about learning the skills that are going to be able to help you to cope. And I think that there's, numerous things in that pathway that people would never have done 30 years ago. And, those who were strong enough survived. But we also, from a potential and reaching potential from a individual all the way up into our broader society, have lost so much along the way because we just didn't give people the skills and the tool sets to survive a more broad spectrum of issues that they were going to face at some stage in their lives.
100%.
You mentioned, Curly one, you mentioned problem solvers, as that being this sort of underpinning sort of resilience, being a good problem solver. I've got a question. In terms of, people's natural ability to problem solve, are people born with that, or is it something that they can develop and learn, do you think?
Yeah, I don't think there's any skill that's all one or the other, nature or nurture. I think there's inherently people are more talented at different things. Like if you give me a communication problem, I'll solve it faster than anyone I know. And if you give me a room of people to go out and influence and talk through an issue with or compel them to do something, I'm really quite talented and gifted at that. But I've also done a heap of work to get better at that. And part of that is just exposure therapy. You go and do more of it, you get better at it. And when people come to me with difficult family issues and so on, it's not a difficult thing for me to work slowly through it in a compassionate way and get them to a point where they go, at least they know the 1, 2 or 3 things that they can do from here. Mm-hmm. I'm not a therapist, but I am able to have that conversation through both experience and also being naturally gifted in some way, shape or form. I think that the wrong thing to think is, resilience in any form is this ubiquitous tool that you can pull out at any stage, right? Different horses for different courses. There's going to be different issues that pop up in your life where you're going to need to have a different set of skills, whether they be financial ones, which is a huge driver of mental health problems in Australia, is a very different set of circumstances and issues that are going to pop up from that versus relationship ones versus issues progressing through your career, or perhaps it's, the stresses and strain of managing the anxiety in your life, whatever it is, right? They all take different skill sets. And so I think it's a mistake to think you're born with all of them. It's a mistake to think you're born with none of them. But it's the answer, unfortunately, like most things, is somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably like you said, just because I lost my eyesight at 16 years old, that no matter what challenge of whatever description, any shape or size moving forward, I'm going to be able to handle it, no dramas, because, you got through that, so you're resilient. But like you said, a financial challenge is completely different to losing your eyesight.
Yeah.
And no different to all the other challenges that you mentioned. And, mate, you've obviously learned a shitload about this whole space, which we'll dive into a little bit later on. But you also mentioned over the past 30 years, I want to take you back and learn a little bit more about Tom before you were the size you are now. And
it wasn't that long. Didn't take long to get to this size.
No, that's it. But take us back. What was life like growing up for you? Was footy always the goal? What sort of kid were you growing up? And take us through sort of up until junior footy and getting drafted in that process.
Yeah, I mean, sport was always a huge part of my life. I grew up in the eastern suburbs in a place called North Ringwood. About as suburban as an upbringing as you can imagine. Dad was a Sparky. Mum worked in the local primary school that I went to, and spent basically all of my spare time either in basketball stadiums or in football clubs. And as well as that, doing well at school was always a thing that was very heavily pushed in my family, and so trying to sort of balance the 3 things I pretty much started doing since I was probably 10 or 12 years old. You fast forward to going through up until around the age of 15, I'm captain of Victoria when it comes to playing footy and playing basketball alongside the likes of Dante Exum and Ben Simmons, 2 guys who are much better than I was, to be fair, but still playing state-level basketball, juggling both sports, doing school as well. And I think there's sort of 2 reasons why my life sort of sped towards that milestone. And the first is I had massive passion to play sport. I think there's just something inherently great about community clubs, about sport as a whole, about working towards things as a team, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much good that sport provides our society and our communities. But I think on the flip side, I was also a kid who had a massive athletic advantage. So I grew 27 centimetres in prep.
27 centimetres in prep
in 1 year, right? So not only did I become like the tallest kid in the school,
goodness me, that's unbelievable.
I also didn't start as a very small kid, so I was basically completely outmatching opposition who were older than me at any stage from a really young age. And I think the other thing was that it really helped me from a practical point of view, not having all of these growth issues later. So what happens with a lot of young sports people is they'll have issues with their knees or their ankles or whatever else, right, as they grow.
Yeah, you were born big.
Yeah, I was born big and early as well, and then sort of just grew and then had a massive spurt in prep, and then basically got to avoid quite a few of those sort of real issues, except for some stuff with my heels and whatever else. And so essentially my whole childhood was that. It was being at footy clubs, being at basketball courts, being with family, being at school. That's pretty much all that I did, and worked very quickly towards obviously starting to think about being a professional athlete, starting to sort of tend my eyes to the horizon of becoming an AFL footballer, idolising guys who are obviously playing the game. And it's one of the funny consequences of that is that so many people go, who do you barrack for in footy? And, you probably won't find a less, irrationally emotional fan than me. Like, I support the Bulldogs today as a life member of the club, and they've been a brilliant part of my life. But I lost that, let's be a quote-unquote football nuffy when I was very young because I was playing state footy, I was captain of Victoria, I was starting to look towards being drafted, and it became a very practical experience.
You were more in it than a fan of it.
Yeah, you had to be, right?
Yeah.
Like I was meeting these guys quite regularly in different circles and really trying to work out how I was going to compete with them in a couple of years' time. So that all sort of happened relatively quickly, and after what was actually a pretty disappointing under-16s carnival in 2011, then I progressed forward in the next 2 years to be basically a TIAC Cup Team of the Year player twice, which is the state league here in Victoria, or was back then. I played in the national championship as a bottom age player, played for the state team twice, was selected for the Australian Institute of Sport team as a 17-year-old. I was an All-Australian, leading goal kicker, like pretty much just had the perfect run into it to being selected at pick 1 in the national draft at the end of 2013.
Mm-hmm. How was that feeling? Like as in, you obviously must go out and if you have a good game, you're going, great, that was awesome, had a good game. But from a mental point of view, when the hype starts leading up, because obviously 20, 30 years ago, being the number 1 draft pick was, cool, this is the best player in the draft. Nowadays, there is that much media around professional sport and AFL specifically, right across the country. Like there is a huge spotlight and an immense amount of pressure on the number 1 draft pick. How was that sort of last 12 months leading into the draft for you from a pressure point of view? Because not only is that a huge part of your life, like you said, from a priority point of view, your family's still pushing, doing well at school. Like there's a whole balancing act happening there at that point in time too.
Yeah, it was a really it came in different phases. Like I think to the question about school, we made some decisions, which I had to go and basically talk to the school about, where I said, I really want to do well at school. I'm finding the workload too cumbersome, so I want to do 4 subjects in year 12 instead of 5, right? And I'd already done a year 12 in year 11, so it was sort of still going to give me sort of 85% of the class time. But basically the reason for that was so that I could actually invest all of that time at school in doing the homework and studies required to actually do well in the exams and the tests. So it wasn't me going, I don't want to do less, it was me wanting to do more, but do it in a more structured way at school. And that worked out really well. I sort of got in the mid-90s in my ATAR and managed to do exactly what I'd set out to do, which was great. But on the actual question leading into the draft, I think there was 2 major phases. And I often talk about this, and I wrote an article about the way the media has changed over the last sort of 15 years when it comes to professional sport. I think basically the stage that I was in when I first entered the league was the social media had entered the scene, but it was pretty much dominated by the SENs, the Channel 7s, Channel 10s, they were pretty much just the major networks on social media, right? So like whatever you're reading on Twitter, which is basically the only one that had a presence in 2014, was the same thing you'd see on print newspaper, on television and on radio. And so the conversation surrounding me was pretty much ubiquitous around who I was as a person, the excitement about me as a player and so on. And I really had an incredible start to the 2013 season where I was kicking 5 goals a game on average.
Yep.
And that was notwithstanding that, there was games where I didn't finish them. Like, it was just a remarkable start, if I do say so myself. And right around that period of time, I think 2 things happened that I didn't sort of foresee. One, I ended up getting injured in a national championship game around 8 or 9 rounds into the year, right? And I didn't play again until the grand final. So I basically had 2 or 3 months off. And during that period of time, because of the trajectory that I was on and the success that I'd had in the first 7 or 8 rounds of the year, people basically just drew a straight line from where I'd started at the start of the year to where I'd gotten to the moon. And so there was this conversation of Tom's is he the number 1 pick? He's probably going to be pick 1. He's the definite. He's a lock. He's the best number 1 pick we've had maybe ever. He's the best key forward. How does he compare to the John Pattons and the Joe Danahers and these guys who come through in the year before me? And there was just this hype train of positive momentum behind my story that I think so many people had such high hopes for.
How was that making you feel when you're hearing and reading those stories, especially in that 3-month period where you're not even playing?
Yeah, it was pretty great, to be honest.
I'm
sitting on the sidelines and
are you thriving under that going, yeah, that's me? Or are you going, shit, I hope that's me?
Yeah, I think the thing that I learned to one of the lessons was that it was a bit hard to disprove that story at that stage, right? Because the track record was there. I'd again had an incredible and very successful bottom age year in a team that finished on the bottom of the ladder, which never happens for key forwards, right? And then I'd started the year and taken the massive leap forward that everyone had hoped that I would take and just started dominating games. And then all the lights went off and I just sat on the sidelines and watched everyone else try and outdo me. And they couldn't because, not only did I have the runs on the board, but those runs were being extrapolated and, perfectionized, if you will, in a way.
The media just took it
off.
Yeah,
you can't disprove it, right? So I was having a great time. But what I learnt was, there's a real foundational perspective that I think we have in Australia, which is that kids who are under 18, we treat pretty well, right? So we talk about their future and their potential and, how good they're going to be. And then the moment they get drafted, and we do this with a lot of different parts of their world, not just footy, then they're open for criticism. It's like once they walked in those front doors of the AFL clubs, that's when criticism can start. And I think my issue was that I built a sort of foundational set of relationships in the media sphere on the first stage, right, of this massive positive wave of momentum, and found out very quickly thereafter being drafted that these people had critiques of me that were, unfounded, unfair in many ways, given how young that I was. But I also think that the other side of it was that there's a real sort of strange things that happens when you're going through the sort of draft process when, to your point, everyone wants to talk to you as a footballer, not as a person. And you have all these people starting to come and create conversation relationships with you based on what they know and what they've read and so on and so forth. And so there were so many games throughout that period where, I remember one in particular. We played Bendigo at Box Hill Oval. I think I had 25 touches or something like that. Don't quote me. And I kicked 3 goals 7 or 3 goals 8, and they gave my opponent best on ground, right? And we won. And I'm like, what are we doing here? Did anyone else watch the game? Right? And I remember Dad saying to me at that stage, he's like, well, Tom, they're obviously not rating him against the position. They're rating him against you. And that was the reason. And I think basically what I'm saying is that there was just such a hub of attention surrounding me at that stage that, I was never going to be good enough. And I started to sort of see that perfection was the only goal and so on and so forth.
Yeah, if you had to kick 10 goals nothing that game, you would have got best on, but because you kicked 3-7.
Yeah, but it would have been a pat on the back. Good, you did your job. That's what we expected of you, Yeah, and I think that sort of unfounded and unachievable level of output was something that I started to get too attached to at that stage. But one of the things I used to cope at that time was school, right? Because at school I got treated normally for the most part. And the reason for that was that most of my friends had similar aspirations to do well at school, and so there was a healthy environment of competitiveness where we were on the same grounds of...
and you were just Tom, right?
Well, just Tom. And I was just trying to get through my schools and my classes, and my schooling and do well. And these guys were doing well as well. So it was sort of a very normal environment to me. And it used to... it started to become more of a sort of a harbour for me just to be, safe and, normal and so on.
Yep.
And I think one of the big regrets that I had throughout my career, if I would call it that, is I actually, through some conversations, decided not to continue with my schooling when I first got drafted in a hope to focus more on the footy side of things. But that balance would have been, I think, something that's really worked well in my life.
It would have been healthy. Healthy to have that balance of focuses and not just be all footy 100% of the time.
So unsurprisingly, you fast forward to the draft. So you go number 1 and you get shipped off to, was it second year, Greater Western Sydney? Third season. Were you happy about that? Being drafted to GWS?
Yeah, I don't know if I was happy. It was sort of a predetermined outcome.
Because of all their concessions, obviously being the club.
So they had pick 1, 2 and 14 that year, I think.
You didn't stand a chance.
And I wasn't getting through pick 2.
No.
So and they just told me flat out. They told me at the draft combine, they said, we're going to take you at pick 1. Which, was weird because I started to get my head around doing it. And none of us had cars up there, right? Except for me.
Yep.
Because I could, organise all this stuff in a premeditated way because I knew that I was going up there. And I also think from my memory that I knew that Josh Kelly was going second, and I had pretty good understanding of what was going on.
Yep.
And so, if you talk to me back then, you will never find a guy who was better at answering media questions that were thrown at draft picks. I was, how you feel about moving away from home? Yep, absolutely. Want to play the game. Can't wait to get up there. I'm an independent guy. I just ticked all the cliches that you can imagine.
Was that getting drilled into you in the background?
No, not really. I was just... I just knew what they wanted to hear.
You'd wrapped your head around it.
Yeah. I mean, again, I've always been quite strong in the communication department.
Well, you can't exactly come out and say, look, I'm a bit bummed. Yeah, going to GWS.
Yeah, there's a lack of choice, no doubt.
Yeah, but you've got to toe the line, don't you?
But yeah, compared to draftees that go, oh, well, I might be going here or I might go there, or because a lot of those questions, like you say, for majority of players getting drafted or up-and-coming players that might be getting drafted, it's well, I could be going to WA. Depending on how the draft falls or who picks who, I might end up in Victoria, and you're sort of going, yeah, I'd love to stay in Victoria if I could, but you didn't have that choice.
No.
There was no choice for there.
You know, if you want to be a guy at the top of the draft, or if someone who achieves the things that, you know, so many of the guys do at the top level, there has to be a completely lack of limit when it comes to ambition, right? You just presume you can do anything. And you have to have that in some way, shape or form, because if you don't have the confidence that whatever's thrown in front of you, you're going to be able to figure out, you'll sit in a constant state of stress and anxiety of like, oh, well, maybe I won't be good enough. And there's a difference between having the chip on your shoulder and the imposter syndrome of needing to work hard to get better than actually putting a cap on yourself and being, oh, no, I'm not up for that, right? And I think for me, that was certainly the case. I wanted to be number one. It was something I set my sights on leading into the 2013 year because I'd had such a dominant bottom age season. It was something I worked towards throughout the summer. It was something that I was, you know, in many ways expecting after the way that I started the year, and it was something that I was, you know, very outwardly spoken about. Yeah, I'm ready to take on the challenge. And I think there's just a level of naivety that comes with being a young footballer, but a young person as a whole that I had, where I didn't probably quite realise what the step up would be like. I didn't realise what playing for the Giants would be like because, frankly, there was a lack of support. Not the people, like, just to be clear, I think there was some fantastic people at the Giants, but it was a brand new club, right? Like, everyone was doing the job basically for the first time. The head coach was doing it for the first time. The assistant coaches was doing it for the first time. We were on the bottom of the ladder. We're all trying to figure it out. You're in
an area that doesn't know AFL.
No, which in many ways was actually an advantage, to be honest. But it was just a.
But if you were at Collingwood at number one pick, your experience would have been so vastly different. Like every week you'd be coming out playing in front of 60, 70, 80,000 people, and up there, what were the crowds like?
I think we had
probably 15,000 or so.
Probably not 10, maybe
10. Okay,
for the most part.
So it's sort of like a decent VFL game, if you will.
Oh, definitely bigger than that.
Bigger than that.
But I think it's less about the numbers at the games because, right, you can always go down to train stations and give people free tickets to footy, right? That's not
true.
That hard to do. But what you can't do is to get them to talk about it if they're not interested. And I think, there would have been a whole raft of different challenges associated with playing at the Magpies or one of these big Melbourne clubs when you are the centre of attention. I worked that out pretty quickly 12 months later when I came back to the Bulldogs, right? Because whilst I wasn't at one of the powerhouse clubs, I was at an established club and I was in Melbourne and I had signed the third biggest deal in AFL history, right? So there was a pressure and a notoriety that came with that, which changed the environment greatly. And I think it was a mistake on my part, or at least a concession that I would make now between myself, my manager, and the club as a whole at the Bulldogs. We didn't probably realise how big of a move this was going to be in terms of the ripple effects across the competition. We didn't probably understand that, me getting traded at that stage as a high pick and forcing my way out of a club meant absolute consequences for clubs across the land for years to come, right? So all of these deals that have happened with guys who have been high picks and have left after 1 or 2 years all started because I did that, right? They never happened before. And, the only way you get a high pick is you basically suffer for a number of years as a supporter and as a club to get access to this number one pick. And then for it to be thrown back into your face and you get 50 cents on the dollar in terms of value back, which is typically what happens, it's a real spit in the eye to people who've supported these clubs who are struggling. And so there was a heap of vitriol surrounding that move. There was a heap of expectation with this level of entitlement that was placed on me and they were perceived that I had because I was now signing a big contract, which to this day I'll say to anyone, if they were offered the same deal, they would have taken it as well. And so there was just a number of ripple effects, I think, that happened when we came back that we just didn't perceive to be the case. But I think an interesting alignment to the thought of going to a different club that was bigger at that initial stage.
How did that all come about, mate? Like the roller coaster of that first 12 months, and then and I'm sure there's plenty of listeners out here that may not follow footy as closely and may not be as familiar with the story, but there was obviously a lot going on with Bulldogs coach and then captain of the club being traded as part of your trade. Was it you requesting a trade first to a Melbourne club? How did that whole process come about, and like the reasons for leaving the Giants? Was that your choice? Was it a suggestion given to you? Give us a bit of insight.
Yeah, I mean, it always starts earlier than you think, right? Like, I remember back to the lead up to the draft in 2013. And, as you would imagine, the likes of St Kilda, who didn't have a key forward at the time, the likes of Carlton, who hadn't had one in a while, the likes of the Bulldogs, they were asking questions of the Giants to see if they'd play ball with the number one pick because they knew that was going to go to me. And, obviously the Giants said, no, categorically, we're not going to do that. And so throughout that first season, the conversation started up again, in particular with the Bulldogs being very forthcoming to my management about an offer that they wanted to table. And it first came about with a phone call from my dad on a Thursday afternoon, where he basically picked up the phone, which we did basically every day at that stage, and he told me, hey, you've got a contract offer. And the Giants had already offered me extension, so my response to him was, I'm not re-signing with the Giants. Like, what are you talking about? You know that. And he goes, it's not from the Giants. And, I'd later find out it was obviously from the Bulldogs. He told me the deal, $7 million, 7-year contract. We met with the club, came back to Melbourne and met with all of the big wigs of the Bulldogs at the time in one of the buys. And to cut a long story short, we got to the stage at the end of this probably 2 or 3 hour meeting at Peter Gordon's house, who was the president at the time. And they sort of presented everything about the club and how good it was, and I was kind of just sitting there going like, mate, you've already offered me $7 million. I'd probably sign with Darabin twos, to be honest.
Yeah, I was sold. I'm 19 years old here.
He's
pretty convincing character, Peter Gordon.
Oh, yeah,
isn't he? He's a lawyer.
Yeah,
so
probably one of the most intimidating and smart people you'll ever meet. But fiercely loyal, an incredibly loyal person.
Yeah.
And to cut a long story short, as I said, we just got to the point where they were like, great, this is all awesome. Tom's absolutely up for it, obviously. But there's an issue. We need to do a trade. And there's only 2 players we think you can trade for Tom that the Giants would even consider. The first is Ryan Griffin. He's your captain. Come off a couple of All-Australians, unbelievable player. And they were like, we can't trade our captain. There'll be a mutiny at the club. And the second one was Marcus Bontempelli, and they were like, well, we're not going to trade him either. So we basically walked away, shook hands, and said, let's try again in 12 months when we have a bit more leverage. And at the end of that first season, I was absolutely exhausted. I think one of the things that we don't sort of know about that well is that players who go through the draft process basically don't have a break for 2 years, right? Because they go season, finals, if they play that, into preparation for the draft combine, into preparation for preseason, and so on. And so you had this 2-year block of no athletic rest or emotional rest, and you're going through
year 12 thrown in there.
Year 12, yeah. And so I was absolutely exhausted. So I went over to Indonesia on a surf trip with a few mates, just trying to like completely decompress from the year.
Yep.
And while I'm over there, I see this headline come through, AFL.com or whatever it was back then, and it was Ryan Griffin has asked for a trade. And I'm like, wow. Oh, that's massive news. Wonder where he wants to go. Open the article, and he says to the GWS Giants to reunite with his old assistant coach, which was Leon Cameron, who was now the head coach of the Bulldogs at the time. And then basically over text message, because there was no phone reception in Indonesia where we were, over text message, we orchestrated the third biggest deal in AFL history, which was a whole range of roller coaster rides of good and bad throughout that next sort of 10 days.
Would have taken your mind off surfing a bit.
Oh, well, to be honest, there was only so much I could do, right?
So I've been relieved almost.
Yeah, I just kept going back out to the surf.
I'll put my phone down for a couple of hours and
someone will figure it out. Like, it was such a stressful period, but at least I had something to focus on. And as I said, like, I think people think that I overplay. Like, the only way to communicate with anyone was sitting in the center of this camp next to the computer and the satellite Wi-Fi that they had set up. This part of the Mental Eyes is as remote as it comes, right? There's barely even power. So I couldn't just sit there and call anyone. I couldn't get through on iMessage most of the time unless sitting right next to the router. And I couldn't make any calls that got through at that stage because the technology wasn't good enough. So it was all done over text message. And it was an incredibly stressful period, in particular when, I'm having to give the green light to my manager to come out and say, hey, Tom hates the Giants. He doesn't want to play there anymore. But in some ways, it also sheltered me probably from the vitriol that I would have gotten back in Victoria throughout that period. And again, it could have worked out the other way, and it didn't go through, and my life would have been absolutely different to what it is today. But thankfully, the deal got done, and I ended up being a Bulldogs player.
Not only a Bulldogs player, but eventually, after a few years there, a premiership winning
player.
You
couldn't write the story, could you? Like, people that go, this is too far-fetched. I mean, there's just so much that happened in such a short period of time where, I tell people all the time, when you're listening to me speak, when you're at these 100 or so events I do every year, and you're listening to the story of the mental health experience that I've had in my life and the lessons and all that sort of stuff, I say, just so you know, like, I'm aware my story is unique and that it is part of the reason why it's so interesting to people. However, the story that underlines it and the journey that I went on is the same one that I hear from people every day. Right? It's the story of people dismissing issues or avoiding issues, letting things build up over a period of time, not developing resources or skills or support that they need, and then eventually something happening, right? And this happens all the time. It might be a relationship problem pops up, or a work issue, a financial one, or whatever, or health, and they just go, oh no, I've got no juice in the tank and I've got no way to deal with this big thing that's crept up on me because I've been just draining myself for 5 years and now I just can't cope and the options become very limited. And so when I go through my story, I'm like, I'm not like any of you, but at the same time, I'm exactly the same as so many of you within the room that have seen people struggle at certain stages in their life.
Run us through that in terms of, like you say, you talk about it hundreds of times a year with all the talks that you do, but from a mental health point of view with footy, it was well documented in the media, but when was that starting at the Giants? How did that sort of start and play out over the next few years in and amongst, obviously, the run of the premiership?
Yes, I think there's sort of 3 phases to it. The first and foremost, there was just in my initial sort of 6 or 12 months with the Giants, or 6 or 10 months, really, what it was in the end, was that I just couldn't get to sleep, right? And I was just exhausted from training. I was exhausted from a new team, a new club, a new culture, a new game plan, everything, right? I was just tired in every way possible. And yet at night, as the hours would dwindle by past midnight, I'd stare at the ceiling, just unable to sleep, stressing about every issue that I could possibly imagine. And this would just happen nights on end. And like everyone, not just footballers, the thing that I was least willing to sacrifice was my job. And so I'd get up in the morning, I'd drag myself out of bed after a few hours of, restless nights and restless sleep of some description. And I'd go to work, put a brave face on, get through it, and then I'd just collapse at the end of the day or collapse the next afternoon or whenever it was. And that happened for a period of time. And I think, one of the issues that happens with mental health challenges is that every time that you think it's the worst that it's going to be, it gets a little bit better and you go, it's all fixed, or at least in my experience. And you're like, oh, well, now we're trending back up again.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, I don't have to do anything. This is the best. And then it crashes back down. And slowly over time, you'll probably see, if you looked at the graph, you'd see some peaks and troughs. But if you drew a line from start to finish, it'd be a steady decline, right? And I think that was certainly my experience. And that happened throughout the first season. In the second 2 seasons, so 2015 and 16, whilst I was at the Bulldogs, my career on the field's going up and up. Things are getting better and better. I'm performing better. We end up winning a premiership in 2016. And yet I'm now having all of these issues around game day where I basically don't sleep leading into games. And I'm having to perform in front of, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people, sleepless, and trying to just get my mind to concentrate and to deal with the stress and strain of being an AFL footballer and the importance of obviously playing in the moment and not making mistakes and so on. And then, as that progressed over a period of time, there'd be a good month here where I'd actually go okay, and then it'd be a horrendous 2 months in a row. It'd be worse than it was previously.
Did the club know about it?
No, I didn't talk to people about it at this stage. There wasn't really a lot of, in my life at least, I felt very much in the space where I didn't have a lot of options, right? As stupid as that sounds for a guy who's, as successful as I was, getting paid as much money as I was, there's the saying, the golden handcuffs, right? It's kind of, it's used more in the sense of how you build a lifestyle that you only can afford by working the way that you do. But I think it also applies when you're looking at, if you sign these big deals and you commit to these big things, whilst they may be lucrative, they also take away a lot of your freedom. That's one of the things that you're sacrificing. Don't feel sorry for me, just to be clear. I'm not saying feel sorry for the guy who was making $1 million a year, but again, when I was processing what to do about all of this stuff, if I did at all, there was very much one, you can't feel bad because you have such a great life. 2, what are you going to do? Walk away or stop or ask for help? Well, the guy next to me is doing the exact same job. He's got the exact same experience. He's making a 20th of what I am. doing the exact same thing, right?
So you almost felt like you didn't have a right to feel the way you were feeling?
Exactly. And I felt guilty if I did. I felt shame. I felt, really a limited vocabulary of how to explain what was going on. There was all sorts of reasons that I put in my head and put in my own path to stop me dealing with it. But again, probably by the end of 2016, for the second stage of my life, I made a really critical error, which was that when I left Sydney in 2014, I thought these issues will all go away because I was homesick, now I'm back home, right? Just this magic silver bullet theory, right?
Grass is greener.
That's right. And then 2 years later, I win a premiership and I go, this will fix everything, right? And then life comes at you very quickly. 8 days later, I'm in surgery for a shoulder reconstruction. 2 weeks after that, I get an ankle clean out. Then I go through the next sort of 6 weeks, using a crutch and in a sling. And then I have to confront straight back to going up to another AFL pre-season, live up to the hype, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these issues come rushing back until the middle of 2017, where I'm still playing footy at the top level. I'm probably sleepless for a couple of weeks. I'm getting injured, I'm getting sick, and I just got to a stage where the limiting factor on me being able to do my job was my physical body, but it was getting driven by the stress and strain and fatigue, the levels that I had based on my mental health.
Your injuries too?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, mate, I'd say this is really simple. I've never been fast enough to do a hamstring, ever. I could run quickly for about 20 metres and I had some really quite good results off the mark, but hamstrings typically are done at high speed. Wasn't necessarily my forte at 105, 6, 7 kilos.
Yeah.
And yet I was having hamstring injuries and I was having calf injuries and all these things that I'd never had before and I didn't need to be having. My body was absolutely destroyed from the stress, strain and otherwise that I was under. And so then you have to confront it. And again, the lesson that I have and the story that I have is not a common one because at that moment in time when everything seemed its worth and all of the bad options were on the table mentally, I did have the support. I didn't have a cost barrier. I didn't have an access barrier. I didn't have a lack of awareness of who to talk to really at that stage, even though I hadn't used the psychologist at that stage. I didn't have a job that, I couldn't feed my family with if I poured. I didn't have any of the barriers. And yet it still took me to the moment in time to actually basically have all the bad options on the table for me to actually reach out to the psych and start to change any of this stuff. And this is why when I look at other people's lives, like you guys, normal people don't have that. And so if they take the path that I did and they don't deal with this stuff and they don't learn how to cope and to seek support and so on, their options are far worse than the ones that I had on the table at that stage. And that's just an unfortunate reality of the way the world is at the moment.
Yeah, it's pretty full on. You mentioned, the pressure that's on number one and the microscope that's on number one. Do you think from the time that maybe you got drafted even now, the last decade or so, that maybe there's a little less pressure on the guys coming through now at number one? And the reason I say that, maybe there was a big documented case, obviously, with Kane Corns in the media, going pretty hard on one of the younger guys, Harry Sheasel, and then everyone's up in arms about that. But maybe in days gone by, it was sort of the moment you turn 18, the moment you jump into the AFL industry, you're fair game. So do you reckon that's changed? And has that sort of helped young people, that there's more of awareness on how people are actually handling that pressure type situation?
It's a good question. I think it's... I think the simple answer is no, I don't think there's less pressure. I think it's different. And I look at it more from a dynamic point of view than a... morality point of view, if you will. So there's sort of three things that I've got in my head at the moment. The first is one of the big shifts that's happened from a media point of view is that we've gone from the opinion being ubiquitous because it was just done by the major networks and broadly speaking, they agree with each other, right? Especially when it comes to sport. Then we went through this stage where there was a real tension between player individuality as social media took a rise and, outsized news sources started and rose and fell and all that sort of stuff. And now we're pretty much in a stage where if you want any opinion on footy, you can go find it somewhere, right? You can find and I used in the example of the article series I wrote, you can find the footies for fun, which is the Dan Gorringe model, which is, basically taking the piss out of everything that happens with footy. You can go the footy's about purpose and people, which is the Dill Buckley route, right? There's a depth to some of the things that he does, which I think is awesome, especially when he talks to coaches. You can do the volatile Kane Corns route. You can go to the practical more insight-driven stuff, the on-the-couch sort of box footy model to a degree.
It's dissected to the nth degree.
And it's represented in a variety of ways to provide a home for a variety of different perspectives. And I don't think that makes it. I don't think it makes it better necessarily for players, but I think it gives people choice, right? And my contention of that article series was, you're in the attention economy and shop with your eyes, right? And shop where if you like this type of material, watch that type of material because where the viewers go, the revenue will go and the focus will go. You talk about the Harry Sheasel moment with Kane Corns. The problem with thinking that people defending Harry is a good thing, which I'm not saying it's not, is that that's the whole point of that model. The whole point of Kane going out and causing and antagonising people is to get a reaction, which drives therefore a interest and a investment in the program that he's obviously a part of, or the numerous ones that he's a part of.
At the cost of Harry's mental health.
Well, look, I think it's one of these things. The really difficult conversation to have is it's not going to change, right? And it's unfortunate, right? I'm talking about in one breath, go and shop with your eyes where you actually want to see the things that you think are valuable. At the same time, it's not going to happen for everyone. And attention is driven by a spectrum of people who have varying degrees of ethics and morality and interests and so on, right? So there's always going to be a spectrum. And unfortunately, if you look across the world, the volatile antagonistic method for everything it's a booming part of the attention economy. But I think at the same time, there is a need and an opportunity for players, one, to support themselves better than there was. There's a different conversation surrounding mental health. There's a different conversation surrounding support and so on. But there's also the opportunity for them to actually be recognised as people, right? So like the way I perceived that I was seen by others was basically as two-dimensional. I was a two-dimensional character running around on a screen or sitting in a newspaper. And there is a great number of places where you can now start to build out that third dimension of you as a person, as a footballer. And I think one of them, for instance, was Harry, that he spent quite a bit of time on SEN as a regular contributor. Right? So then people get to know who he is.
Sure, yeah.
It's a bit more difficult if you see someone and you think about them in three dimensions to say some of the things that were said to me. And again, that's only my experience. So no, I don't think it's easier. I think it's just as hard. I think there's more eyeballs than ever, and the speed of the news cycle is quicker. But I do think there's probably more diversity in how people think about footy, which might make the outcome a little bit different.
Right.
What sort of support do clubs, the AFL, the system in general provide to players like yourself, like the new players coming through, about handling that level of spotlight? From a mental health point of view, from a psychological support point of view, because like it is such a unique industry in terms of, like you say, we're all just normal people. Like one year you're just a kid in the classroom doing school like everyone else and playing footy and just loving playing footy for what it was, and then all of a sudden like that there is a huge shift there and a whole lot more pressure.
I think there's two ways to answer the question. There's a standardised policy-based approach that the AFL have gone down in terms of their mental health support, where they have a psychologist who is assigned to the club. There's a bunch of frameworks and strategies and so on that are involved from the top level all the way down. There's a mental health charter that you can go and read, which is quite interesting as well. And they see it as a core component of the game as a whole, which I think is great. And I think it's important. The problem with standardising anything is that people don't like to be put in boxes, right? And so you talk about, I think it's a mistake to say, oh, well, Tom's experience was this. How are you training players to deal with what Tom went through? I'm like, well, my experience, most 95% of players, no one gives a shit about, right? No offense, right? Like, as in, you're not high enough on the priority list to be absolutely lambasted at every moment of your career, which, again, I'm not saying is better or worse.
There's a little bit more grace
out there different,
for the players that are coming through from picks 5 to who knows where.
Yeah, exactly. It could be any stage in your career. It could be a different stage in which club you're at. Like, I think there's a very real environment where, say, my experience with the Giants, there's a lot of guys in the Giants who haven't been criticised that heavily because, frankly, they just wouldn't grab the views because they're playing for the Giants. And by the way, they've been a fantastically successul club in the last 10 years and they've got great players, right? But it's just they just don't have the eyeballs on them. Therefore, it doesn't have the return on investment from a time to advertising revenue that the media is based on. And so I think it's a tricky question. But I think basically what's happened is, one, there's been a huge shift in the conversation, which I think is really important. There is definitely resources at all of these clubs have placed to deal with it better. The question that I have is whether it is obviously something that is a really big part of them coming through the talent pathways. And more importantly than that, is it really a priority for players coming through? Because at the end of the day, when I was in their shoes, and a lot's changed since then, but a lot hasn't, I was solely and only basing my focus, energy, and everything else on getting to the next level, to getting to be an AFL footballer, to play the best that I could, and nothing else really mattered. And the reason why I signed a $7 million contract when I was 18 or 19, just turned 19, was because of that perspective that I had. Right? So I can say in one breath that me trying to run through brick walls and make everything happen in one way is a really bad way to approach life. It also gave me the greatest financial opportunity that I'll probably ever have in my lifetime, because that's the approach that I took. And that's because, and the reason why that ended up happening was because I was so successful, an 18-year-old, had so much track record as a junior, and the growth curve that I have because of that investment. Then I get to sign this deal. So on a net basis, was the way that I behaved and the choices that I made a bad thing for my life? Probably not. But the answer is that if I'd continued to act that way, then very good chance it would have ended very badly. Do you know what I mean? It's a really tricky conversation I have with people, because you want it to all be based around here's a simple answer to a complicated problem, but in some ways that just makes things worse.
You know, throughout the conversation, you've discussed about how you were in a position of privilege, so you've got options available to you, from a resource perspective, but from a general society perspective, for people that don't have that, or maybe people that don't have, maybe they live in rural regional, don't have access to mainstream supports, that sort of stuff. What's the answer for them? People that don't have those options to them, that feel like they're up against it. What sort of advice could you give them?
Yeah, for sure. So just to be clear, I'm not huge on the advice game. Again, I think, and I'm not saying I won't answer the question, but I think I see a big mistake happen in this world, and it's not just the mental health environment. It's not just the high performance environment. It's not just the finance. Like, it's easier to sell a product that is proclaiming to have all the answers to all of your issues than it is to say, hey, it's going to take a bit of work, right? And I'm more in that it's going to take a bit of work bucket, right? Much to my own detriment. And so, look, I think that there's a fundamental change that needed to happen, which I think in some way, shape or form has happened over the last 15 years, which was, if you're a guy in particular, but if you are a person as a whole and you can't articulate what is going on and what issue you have and you can't define it, very difficult to go and get support for it, right? So when I went through school, there was an awareness that we had that there was kids who needed mental health support of some kind, but that was usually in the disabled kid space. It was more around people who needed aid workers at school. It was people who missed big chunks of their schooling. It wasn't hey, everyone's dealing with something. How do we learn to deal with the 95% of issues that go on? We just saw the tip of the iceberg, if you will.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that because I'm proud of it. I'm saying that that's what it was like at school. So when I was confronted with massive issues around insomnia, later anxiety, panic attacks, depression, I had no idea what was going on. So if you can't define it, it's very difficult to go ahead and go, great, this is the problem, or this is the set of problems. I'm going to go and seek this person because that's who I need to talk to. So I think first and foremost, the reason for this whole conversation around awareness, and call it education of some description, which can be criticised, is you need to give people the ability to scope an issue and to know how to actually resolve it and where to go to get that sort of support. But to your question about regional Victoria in particular, I do probably 35, 40 events in regional Victoria a year. Maybe not quite that, maybe 30, 35. And there's a few set of unfortunate facts, right? There's some great organisations doing some amazing work out there, but the primary problem in most parts of regional Victoria and Australia is that there's not enough support, there's not enough doctors, not enough psychologists. It costs too much. The wait lines are too long, and the communities are, if not just changing, many of them are dying and breaking down, right? Yeah. So that's happening across the country.
Sure.
And when I talk to regional communities, and I have a specific example where I was up in a place called Lockington Bemorm Footy Club, which is up near Echuca. And it was actually on the national election day, so it was May 3rd, if I'm not mistaken. And we were sitting there, and they just brought together as a footy and netball club a men's health day where they had the bank there doing financial health checks. They had me there talking about mental health. They had the nurses on call doing blood pressure and glucose tests, right? They had all these people there available for free for the community because the footy and netball club had decided this is a really important thing. And they knew they could get people to go, I'm at the footy already, I might as well do this, versus go and wait in line for 3 months to get access to X, Y, and Z.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
And I said to them, what's funny about where I'm sitting today and at this event is that we've just been told for 3 or 4 weeks, maybe longer, that this is a day where we're going to vote on the future of Australia, right? Which, of course, in every election in some way, shape or form is true. And I said to them, but the unfortunate fact is that whatever they're talking about, almost none of it, if any, and probably zero, but will actually be something as powerful as you turning up to your local footy and netball club with the opportunity to proactively deal with some of the biggest challenges in mental and physical health ailments for your community. And my point is that there's never going to be enough doctors, psychologists, or psychiatrists for all of us in any one period of time. And this concept of community and mateship in Australia has always been we look out for each other, right? There's something in it, it's always been that way. But the interpretation has been from a wartime point of view, we've got this stand up for your mates and fight for the guy next to you. From footy point of view, it's always about standing up for your team on the field. Yeah. And all I'm pushing for in regional Victoria is the application of that slight shift to go, let's include the mental health component as well. Because not only is it the thing that is unfortunately killing many, many regional Australians, it's also the thing that leads to so many of the other issues that they're facing from a physical health point of view, from a divorce and relationship point of view. It's a driving factor in so much of that. And so how do we actually use our community hubs and the infrastructure, and particularly, obviously, I'm biased, it's based around footy, to actually change this narrative and to provide the resources that these communities need, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, reinvent the infrastructure model that, frankly, doesn't make any sense from a cost to benefit point of view, or at least from the government's perspective. How do we actually use the infrastructure that's still there, that's still thriving, which is community sport, and use that to leverage the better outcomes that we're looking to get to?
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, we speak a lot in footy clubs, as you do, mate. And like you say, there's people that are so invested, so connected, and probably it's in a place and an environment that people are comfortable in, which I think means that they're more receptive to going, oh, well, if the club's doing it, I'll put my hand up and get that test done, or I'll sit through this conversation that I normally wouldn't get out of bed and come down to if it was just a standalone event. But because it's connected to my club and I love my club and all my mates are going to be there anyway, let's go. So I think that you're getting a lot more people into conversations and programs and things like that typically wouldn't, like you say, just tapping into how much of a hub that local footy club is. But in stark contrast to then your experience at the professional level was so different to that. Similar in a lot of ways, but played such a big part in your life. I'd love to jump back to that part of the story if we can, and then we'll go into sort of what you're doing now and what's next for you. But for you, what was rock bottom? And what moment was rock bottom that then became the moment that you go, something's got to change here? Because obviously there was a lot of media and the stories came out about you're pulling out halfway through a 7-year, $7 million contract.
Big decision.
Massive decision to make.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting parts of my story is that it's much simpler to describe a very complicated issue with this happened, so Tom left footy, and it's sort of something I've had to recorrect for the last 7 years or so, 6 years, which is that by the time I got to 2019. I was looking ahead, not making a knee-jerk reaction at the time. And the reason I say that is that in 2017, if you ask about rock bottom, that's when I hit it. And I hit it in a way where I was basically left between a rock and a hard place, which was, I'm either going to go out and break down on the field if I can get through it at all, or I'm going to actually take time off here to actually get on top of things and start to use the resources that you so rightly pointed out that I had available to me. And to be specific, it happened, I think, in June 2017, where, I hadn't slept basically for a couple of weeks. I had all these injuries starting to come through. This is off the back of 3 or 4 years of severe sleep issues on and off throughout that period of time. a huge rise in issues with anxiety, panic attacks, huge bouts of depression where I didn't feel like I could do anything with my life except for drag myself to the footy club because I knew I just had to be there. That was the last thing I was willing to sacrifice.
And up until this point in time, you're still hiding it from the club?
Yeah, I think just at least inadvertently, not defining it or not mentioning it to them and so on.
Yeah.
But, like the hiding bit, it's funny. It doesn't come through I found, at least for me, it's not the shame of having it that I had. It was the unwillingness to fail at the thing that I'd agreed to do, right? So I'd agreed to be a footballer, I'd signed this deal, and I was unwilling to budge on that. And it took for that thing to break for me then to go, I've got to do something about this. And the reason why my story is so dangerous, right, if you try it my way, is that I had a safety net of they weren't going to sack me. I was still on $1 million a year. I still had all of the support, and I had as soft of a landing for mental health as you can possibly have
it's a good point.
In that moment in time, right? And so you talk about, I'm not a huge fan of the privilege word, but you talk about the resources I had. Unbelievably lucky.
Yeah.
And if you do that as a normal person, you're going to land on something that's not pillows, but is bits of broken glass, right? Because if you lose your finances and your relationship. And that's what happened in 2017. And, I got to the point where, again, it was raining sideways. It's just Melbourne is such a lovely place to be at that time of year.
Shout out.
It wasn't helping. I could have been depressed in the Bahamas. And I just couldn't get through another game. And they were like, yep, Tom, you've missed 2 weeks with these issues, but we're going to, we need you to play next weekend in the ones over in Perth, I think it was. So we got to get you through half a game in the VFL. And I'm like, there's no way. There's no way I'm getting through this. I'm going to break something. And I don't know if the feeling was I'm going to get injured, but it was like, it's not possible. And so at that stage, with the rain coming down sideways, I picked up the phone and called the club psychologist and told her what went on. And look, there was a lot of things that happened afterwards, much of which is quite well documented. But, whilst I landed on the analogy of the bunch of pillows, the thing that I had to do that most people don't is I had to then go out and publicly talk about why is Tom missing footy? What is your decision around what to say to the media? How are you going to address the world, right? And, I'm not suggesting I'm that famous in any way, shape or form, but at least at that time, coming off the back of 2016, we had 4.5 million people watch us play footy on that day, right? Plus the people in attendance, plus the other 6 or 7 million people in Australia who care about it, who might not have watched directly but would see things. There's a lot of people who were going to get very interested about why a 21-year-old kid was just, or 22-year-old kid was just taking time off footy and, couldn't handle being paid $1 million a year whilst they're struggling to, put food on the table for their kids. And there was a whole different range of vitriol that came out through that period of time. But the thing that I really stand firm on as of to this day, and the thing that I think was foundationally important for my not only recovery but also the next period of time in my life, was that I was actually quite specific about what had happened. Because I think that there's a tendency to go, one, I don't know how to define it, so therefore it's very difficult. But once you can define it, you sort of really want to go, but I'm just struggling, so I'll just put it behind the mental health card or whatever it is, right? Which, again, can be very ambiguous in terms of what it means. Whereas for me, I said, I haven't slept. I've got incredible issues with insomnia, anxiety and depression, and I need to rehabilitate this issue, just like any other issue, to get myself back out on the field to do my job as a footballer. And I think at least in that part, people went, oh, shit, this is actually like something pretty serious. This is not someone feeling sorry for themselves, which we sort of have the tendency to try and minimise everyone else's issues and go, oh, this big doofus is sad because people told him he should have kicked more goals on Twitter. I'm like, well, that obviously, it had spiraled well out of control past that point.
Yeah. What wasn't really caring about what anyone was saying on Twitter at that point in time.
I tell you what, wasn't really fun to walk into supermarkets and get abused as a 19, 20-year-old kid, right? It wasn't very fun going to the footy and people feel comfortable to come up to you and talk about how overpaid you were. Like, not a very comfortable life for me at that stage. Especially as a guy who, frankly cared a lot about what people thought of him. Less so now, but still important. And look, then the next couple of years, after that moment in time, things progressed. I mean, I made a lot of ground back, came back to play some footy at the end of 2017, the VFL, played some finals, was actually quite successful on the field at least, and then took a massive break at the end of the year as AFL footballers, again, are lucky enough to do. Which is in the off-season, and started to work very hard on this stuff and got to quite a decent point throughout 2018. before being injured with a bad back injury and ending up on the sidelines and trying to work out what I was going to do with the next stage of my life. And I started this monologue with saying I've been trying to live this story down for 6 years. Well, one of the reasons was when I retired, the coach came out and said, it's a depression thing, basically. And it really wasn't at that moment in time. It was much more do I want to do this thing for my future or have I done and accomplished what I want to do in footy? And if the answer is the second or the latter, and I don't know if I want to do it moving forward, the pressure that's involved in my life as a footballer, but the football experience as a whole as a professional, it's not going to lead to good results. And so whilst it wasn't I'm in a really tough spot today, I'm going to quit, it was this is not the path that's going to lead me down the best results for my life moving forward. And so I'm going to actually take the stand of saying, I'm done with my career. I'm happy to give back all this money that's owed to me. I'm ready to move on. And I'm going to start something new, which is a very different perspective than saying I'm going to stop playing footy.
Any regrets?
Oh, it would be nice to have the extra couple of $1 million, to be honest. Just joking. No, I actually don't have any regrets. Every moment in my life which I've stuffed up, I think the regret comes from one question. Did you make the right decision or did you make the decision right? Yeah. I think there's so much in life we go, what's the perfect path forward? And the answer is there's not really one. But there is once you make a call, you've got to commit to doing everything you can to make that call the right one. And for me, that's essentially what's happened. And, you look at my life today and I'm lucky enough to work with great people. I have a great business that I'm a part of in Ever Perform. I've got a great group of people that I work with at the different ambassadorships that I have with WorkSave for in previous years, Lifeline or now Movember, the Bulldogs Foundation, RecLink Australia, who do magnificent work. I get to speak to probably, 10 to 15,000 people a year through the events that I do. It's a pretty amazing life, and it's something I'm very grateful for. And almost all of the issues that I've had in my life have led me in some way, shape or form to being here today rather than, sitting back and wishing I could, Monday morning quarterback everything that's ever happened.
Yeah. Fascinating chat, Tom. Thank you so much for coming in. At the start, we asked you your old man was a reference point for toughness. And going through that journey that you've just walked us through step by step, knowing what you know now, how would you articulate what true toughness means in today's world?
Yeah, I think I touched on it a little earlier, but I think the simplest way to put it is that tough people are problem solvers, and there's a certain level of foreshadowing that they can do for their own lives, and the admission that things aren't always going to be smooth sailing and smooth waters. And so therefore they put things in place, whether that be from a understanding point of view, a structural point of view, or a relationship point of view, where they know that they have options when these issues do invariably pop up in our lives. And the more that all of us can try and live in the life of being proactive about dealing with things, the better off we'll be. As unfortunately, the combination of high pressure, few options and being reactive ends up with people, not having a lot of choices. And I think that a lot of where the real challenge comes down to in a mental health point of view is not dealing with the little things over a long period of time. It is that combined with dealing with the big thing at the end. And for so many people, they don't actually make it through that life, part of life's challenges, which is incredibly sad. So as someone who's seen the effects of that directly within my own family and losing people to suicide and so on, I think so much of it ends up coming down to a point where it's just people are completely out of options and they don't feel like anyone really cares. So often we see in the aftermath of those types of events that there is what seems like millions of people that care, right? And so for both the people who profess to care, we need to be better at communicating that to support those people. But I think on the flip side, we've also got to do absolutely everything we can in our power to deal with our own issues proactively rather than waiting for them to get too big to handle.
Love it.
100%. Thank you so much for coming, sitting down and having a yarn with us today. We really appreciate both you being open to share and also giving us a great insight into what life was like. As you said, so much media around it, so well documented, but at the end of the day, you're just a normal bloke who had an extraordinary set of circumstances and roller coaster for a number of years, with sort of real feelings, real challenges that so many people can relate to, from anxiety to insomnia to depression and all that. So, mate, thank you so much for sharing and appreciate you coming on Talkin Tough.
Cheers, Tom.
Thanks, guys.